Welcome to this afternoon's roundtable, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Abby. I work with Barry Cranford, who's the founder of the London CTOs. And I have the privilege of hosting today's event. I do have a list of questions, but obviously if anyone's got any burning ones, we can start with those in a few moments. For those of you who don't know, the London CTOs is just one of the communities that's run by RecWorks. We are a tech recruitment company with a massive difference. As a company, we believe that recruitment can really be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring, and personal development, and that is where events like this come into play, really. From our perspective, if people want to learn and others want to teach or share knowledge, we are more than happy to connect you through our communities and events. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in the future. To date, we have run over 700 events for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs, a whole range of people, a whole range of abilities, experience, etc. We have run conferences, lightning talks, hackathons, all sorts. We have earlier this year made our 4,000th introduction through our Meet to Mentor program, which we are really excited about, and we're looking forward to seeing how that progresses even more. We're looking forward to 5,000 introductions through that program. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and that's what this event is part of. If you'd like to know more about any of our communities, please do get in touch with myself, Helen Lewis, or Barry, and we can take it from there. The recording of today's session will be available on YouTube. You can find it on our RecWorks YouTube channel probably in a couple of weeks, or I will put my LinkedIn profile in the chat if you'd like me to send you the recording once it's ready. Ping me a message and I'll be able to do that for you. Now, one thing I do really want to let you guys know about is we have got a new community in RecWorks called the Aspiring Tech Co-Founders community. Emma, who's my colleague, I believe she'll be popping into the meeting at some point today. She is the community manager for the Aspiring Tech Co-Founders. And our next event, called Find a Tech Co-Founder, is on the 1st of March at 1 o'clock. So pop that in your diaries, 1st of March, 1 o'clock. We have a lot of interest from various companies. We're anticipating about 6 signing up. The format is, it's done through Airtable. And usually we as RecWorks introduce the event, followed by each company giving a 3-minute presentation. So you just get a snippet of information about what they do and what they're looking for. You then get to go into the Airtable lounge and join a table with a company that interests you. We do ask that you move tables about every 10 minutes so that all attendees get to hear from all of the companies in more detail. But after that, you're free to return to anybody that you're more interested in hearing from. So this event is perfect for anyone who is considering stepping into a co-founder role either now or at some point in the next year or so. It's a great information gathering and networking event, and we would love to see you there. So again, that's the 1st of March at 1 p.m. And again, I'll put the LinkedIn page for the Aspiring Tech Co-Founders into the chat shortly so that you can see it for yourself and connect with Emma from there if you want more information on that. So with no further ado, today's roundtable, architecting teams that scale. Does anybody have any burning questions to start us off? I do have a list, but if you've got a question you want to ask, I'd love you to go for it and start off our conversation. Everybody's silent. All right, I'm going to throw a question out there and you guys can discuss. So my first question, scaling a team is difficult. And going from a startup to a scale up means that you sometimes may have key engineers who have a lot of knowledge and the team depends on them. What are some of the best ways to free them up to do what they're best at instead of getting stuck in code reviews all day? Any thoughts on that?
I think that presupposes several questions first about what you want the career development to be for them. The main problem I've hit with scaling up in the past has been that if you're scaling and you continue to scale fast, every solution you put in place now for a problem just creates a new problem a little bit later down the line. So you realize that you need a dedicated DevOps person. You hire a DevOps person, and the DevOps person gets overloaded 2 months later because now you need 3 DevOps people. But it's difficult to replace one person with 3. What you've really done is you've created a situation where you hired a person you needed to create a team. So, and you have a similar issue with engineers doing what they're good at. You need to make a decision. Is this an engineer who wants to become a staff or principal, in which case code reviews is the best thing they can possibly be doing and they shouldn't consider anything else? Or you want them to become a research engineer, in which case you probably want to get them focusing more R&D. But I think there's this contextual thing that every question during scaling, you have to ask yourself, what is the next step for this person or this role? What is going to happen to them? At what point they're going to be overloaded, and what's the gap they're going to go into? Without that context, I'm not sure you can really give a good or bad for it.
What was the problem? So if you get one DevOps and then you get 2 more, yeah, of course, there will be different people, but so how would you manage that the best way?
Yeah.
So if you, the classic problem is you do something like say, we're going to get a QA person. All QA problems, get the QA guy to it. And people get used to being the QA guy. You go to the QA guy. The day that you now have 2 QA guys, everyone still goes to the first one because they memorized he's the QA guy. Because he didn't tell them it was a QA team. He told them it was a guy, not a team. And if you're scaling slowly, this isn't a problem. You've got plenty of time to think of people it's changed. But when you're scaling fast, you often see that there isn't time to, by the time everyone's got the hang of the fact there is even a QA person, it's no longer a person, it's already a team. And now that one person is having to say no to lots of things. It's like, you promised me that was a QA guy. No, that was last month or last quarter.
Okay, yeah.
So I guess constant change can be a challenge in any team. Sorry, Rob, were you going to say something?
I was curious actually about something you said. So you said that that you really need to understand the engineer and figure out what they want their career path to be or what their career path should look like before you can figure out whether they should be spending their time in code reviews or not. I guess one question, and you kind of like said, R&D people maybe are the kind of people who you want to avoid having them spending a lot of time in R&D. Are there any other kinds of engineers where you don't want them to be spending their time in R&D, and you don't want them to be spending their time in code review? Is there like, I don't know, how do you think about that?
I mean, personally, I think everyone should be doing code review without question, but at that point, that's personal choice. I accept that culturally or organizationally or whatever you're ideologically, you may have an organization where you are happy to have people who aren't doing code reviews. But my point is that question should come from the context of what does that engineer want to be doing next? And by next, I mean next year, but also what do you need that engineer to be doing next year? And those hopefully.
We work with what we call forward hiring. So we think of, so this team has to grow from, let's say, 0 or 5 to 25 or 30. So let's get the management in place first that a 25-person team would need. And you do that in the initial stage, and then you build the team you fill in the team afterwards, rather than, you get the people and then you get the manager, and the manager is going to say, well, gosh, thank you for hiring me as manager, but you've given me this team, I didn't select them, and they're all the wrong people, and it's all the wrong skills, and I would have done it differently. So we think of trying to, it's difficult, but trying to get a forward hire, and so you hire the managers. Sometimes there's a chicken and egg, because sometimes the managers want to join an existing team and there's nothing there, so that also requires a certain personality. But do anybody else work with forward hires?
We don't. I must say that intrigues me, because I'm wondering, it sort of presupposes that you know the capacity you'll need. So imagining I will need 25 people, is it possible to be that accurate ahead of time, I suppose? Do you know you need the manager? Could a couple of, forgive the word, could a couple of rock stars solve the problem?
Yeah, of course you do. Yeah.
It's a classic problem here. So I agree with Adam on a lot of those points. And to Jack's point, are there other people who shouldn't be spending all day doing code reviews? Yes, people who are bad at code reviews, people who will annoy other developers by nitpicking just because the code isn't exactly as they would have done it. So, there's things you can do to mitigate that, have very good coding standards and have very good linting. So, it's a machine that hurts everybody's feelings by saying, oh, I'll pretty up this code because you've not really done it very well, so that code reviews can be spent on far more architectural concerns. If you've got all that in place, then you can mitigate the negative effects of slightly toxic, you've not done it exactly how I would have done it, code reviewers. So I would take those people out of the mix. And what we're really talking about here is the kind of age-old problem of the best technical person becomes the most senior technical person, then wants more money. And if you don't have an individual contributor track, an R&D, a chief scientist, a lead researcher, then the way they get more money is to become an engineering lead. And it's usually a minority of tech leads that become good engineering leads, because engineering lead is about people rather than code.
Any other thoughts on that? I do have a comment in the chat, which I think you guys will probably have seen. Rob says that instead of having specialist DevOps engineers, we embed DevOps principles across all engineering teams. Does anybody else do that kind of working system?
I think yes. Sorry, please.
No, sorry. My camera's broken, so apologies. I hate it when you have to stare at somebody's name. I think there's a couple of points there. I think part of the scaling is not just a kind of a headcount game. It's a cultural game as well. So I think if you're thinking about, should I have one DevOps person or 3 DevOps people, I would be thinking more about, do you have a DevOps culture, and what do you want your DevOps culture to be, and who do you then want to do it? So you may have, hate the job title, DevOps engineers who may help guide, coach and steer. But if you want that as a culture, your engineering team should understand what a DevOps culture is and should help to drive your culture. But that often needs people who will lead it by coaching it, not lead it by owning it. Otherwise, I think you end up just with a very siloed organization. My other comment was on the forward hiring thing. I think it's also have a plan about what you think you might look like. I think I've seen organizations that will grow through, let's hire 20 more engineers, and then wonder why 6 months down the road they've got no more output than they had before, and all of their current employees are just fed up and have left. I think have a plan and have a structure of how you think you would grow. So I'm working with an organization at the moment. We're based very much around kind of a team topologies approach, Matthew Skelton's book, if you're familiar with that. And that gives you a flexible approach. And for this business, it's about, how do we align teams to deliver value for customers? Not how do we get more engineers to write more code? So I think when you're forward hiring, don't just think about playing a numbers game. Think about, what are you trying to achieve as a business? and who do you need to actually get you there? And it might not be more engineers. It might be more product people that need to do discovery work before you can even know what your value is to your customer. So I think if you've got a model and it's got a model that's flexible, you can then start to think about, who do I need to hire? Where do my current people going to sit in my model? Who have I got the opportunity to develop? Who do I hire? Who do I outsource? And so on. So have a plan and have something in your head before you go out and get people.
I had a question on who do you develop? We have engineers who would like to become managers, who've never managed before. How do you think about that as you grow?
I think as well, if you need managers, what do you want managers to do? We have a very, very lean management structure. You know, I'm looking at scaling an organization up to about 70, and we've got six people who are leaders in the business. You're trying to develop your team to take leadership responsibility for what they do. Not, I want a development manager who will tell people what to do. I think if you get that approach, you'll struggle with a kind of command and control culture, as opposed to build a culture where people own your business goals. Build a culture where teams understand where they're going, align them with value, and then start to develop the people that, you know, some people will want natural leadership roles, but it might be a technical leadership role. Some people might like process. You know, typical, they want to be a scrum master, they want to be a development manager. Okay, so use them in kind of those skills. So I think it's go find out where people want to go and what skills they've got, and then again fit them into your model. Don't just I think some people's perception of, I want to be a manager, I would just go and unpick that completely. What do you mean you want to be a manager? Do you want to be a dictator? In which case, we don't need dictators. I want to be a leader and I want to be a coach. Oh, okay, fantastic. How can you develop those skills?
We look at when technical people or senior developers, they've got like 3 ways to go. They can either become go into the team lead, like people manager role, that's the one Ken talked about, or they can go into a technical evangelist, so they become like an architect, and at the very end they become the one that knows everything about database design and technical. That can be a career path. Or they can go into more the product. They want to know more about, they want to learn more about the domain model. How do you make faster payments or PSE2 implementations? Absolutely fantastic. And that's really where the interest is. And you're just kind of like, I don't think you can make a dog become a cat. So you have to, you know, you have to see what their talent is. And I agree, we see a lot that, you know, they want more money and then they become people managers, but they suck at it. So you have to have that ability that being a technical evangelist is just as well paid or better paid than being a people manager. Actually, team leads have a lower salary expectation, we find, than very, very, very niche technical experts have a higher payment. And product, you know, there's no upper limit to how much value you create for the company if you go into product. But I think there are these kind of 3 really general career paths that a technical person can go into.
So we've spoken a little bit about, obviously, the kind of hiring and how you grow. One of the questions we've had submitted as well is, when is it right to prune the team in order to enable healthy regrowth?
If you, do you mean, did you say prune as in, I would be continually looking at a team as to, there's a classic, if anyone's familiar with kind of EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, really nice business model, they have a thing about analyzing people, and it basically says, you know, do people get it? Do they get the journey you're on? Do they want the journey you're on? And have they got the capacity to do it? If they don't get it and they don't want it, you prune them. You don't want people in your team that don't want the journey you're going on. No matter, you know, if they're, I've struggled in the past with having really strong technical people and spent 6 to 12 months trying to get them to play ball. And the lesson I learned from that was they should have gone in month 1. So because you'll always find good people that want to come on a journey. So I think when do you prune? Yeah, whenever you have to.
I think the problem with the word prune is that pruning, you do lots of cutting at the same time, which I think is an absolutely disastrous mistake. That's if you've completely screwed up and failed to do what Ken was just describing, and you've let a lot of them fester because you, God knows why, you didn't have your eye on the ball. Should be a case by case basis. Ideally, you never prune because you don't make mistakes that bad, and because you do proper career management for people, and they self-elect to move on or change or whatever. And if that's not working with someone, then yeah, you deal with them straight away. I think the idea of waiting, it's probably an accident of the choice of language, but I have seen companies where they deliberately do like every quarter or every half or every year, they do a sweep, and it's just stupid, in my opinion.
I think that describes Amazon's practice, right? They do stack ranking, and the bottom percentile is put on a pip, and they evict a lot of people every quarter. It's not to my taste.
Yeah, I've come from the other side really with, I don't know if you guys can hear me, it's a new setup here, I've just moved house, but yeah. So I come from the other side, which was the startup. I was the first employee, and we had the two founders, one of them was technical, and we built up it's a small team over 6 years. No one ended up leaving, but really what we were very specifically looking for, I think even at the employment stage, was just people we got on with, really. We weren't really particularly looking for, we needed a UI, someone with UI skills, we needed someone with database skills, but it was more about really focusing on the team. And we were very aware from the beginning that one person with one ego, or, you know, when you're a team that size, can have a huge impact. So we were more kind of, interviewing wasn't perhaps as technical as it could be, but we were really looking for the right people for that team. And like I said, 6 years later, we got acquired. No one ever left the team. So probably got very lucky. I think since that chapter, I've been more in bigger corporates and sort of seen the other side as well. It doesn't always work out like that. But then I think that it can be, I agree we should get rid of something that is festering, that is because it poisons the team, it poisons people's the way of doing the work, right? So productivity and so on is really linked. It shouldn't feel like work every day. It should be a pleasure to do. And what one bad person could upset.
Can I comment on the pruning? I think, you know, pruning, the word actually implies a wrong way of building a tech team. If you prune, it's because you've had a lot of people, and then you are then you decide, let's say you hire 30 people and you just fire 10, the 10 worst, the bad hires. If you are a tech company and you want to be the best possible employer to attract the best possible talent, and that is not a way a good employer works. A good employer doesn't work like that, because who would join a company who prunes? I wouldn't. And so you can't get the best people if you're not the best employer. There's a kind of like there's no free lunch in that. So if you think of pruning, then I wouldn't want to work with you, and you shouldn't, and none of the good developers would want to work for you. And you probably need it. You know, you need pruning a lot, because you'll be getting the second rank of candidates.
So would you guys agree then that the better practice is more like, I like the gardening analogy. See, I like these kind of things. So it's more like weeding, in as much as sometimes you get the odd one or two and you pick them out and it's dealt with, but it's more gradual than, oh, this rose bush is completely finished flowering and I need to destroy the whole lot in order for it to regrow. It's kind of the more gradual, every so often kind of act. Does that sound a bit better analogy to use?
But weeding is something you should only be doing when you arrive at an organization that's had a bad culture, has been badly managed, has been doing badly for a long period of time, has built up a lot of toxicity, and there's just no sensible way forwards other than a significant amount of destructive change. For any other organization, especially one that's your own, you should never allow that to happen. I mean, generally speaking, if someone's joined your company, unless it turns out they were secretly a mass murdering serial killer psychopath and you knew nothing about them and you did no background checks, really, they joined your company because they liked the company, they liked the product, they liked the people. And okay, it's not working anymore. They've become toxic, but normally there's a reason for that. And your job in management is to find out what those reasons are and help them through them. And in general, there shouldn't be a need to get rid of anyone. There is, because it just doesn't always work. But in general, you should be avoiding that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Adam. I think the times that I've gone in and done the kind of get it, want it capacity to do it has been exactly that scenario where you've joined a company, they've been stuck for 2 years, they're struggling, they're not getting stuff over the line, and you've got 1 or 2 people in there that are potentially aren't good for the business. But I agree with you, if you're growing your company and you're recruiting the right people, I've forgotten the name already, whoever moved house. I loved your comment about recruit people on their on what they want and recruit the right people, and you can usually train them. So get the right people in your business first.
Yep.
And you shouldn't need to prune or weed or tree lop or anything else.
I think engineers need to have a gardening mindset. And I posted a slide in the chat that's part of a talk that I give about how engineering is not this often a rigorous discipline, but in those circumstances I'm talking about pruning code and I'm not talking about pruning people. I agree with Adam. I think that you don't really want to save everyone you can, but realize very quickly the ones that you can't. I think something that was said just then by Ken, I think, was you need to hire people who are self-aware enough to know that they need to change and committed enough to self-improvement. And it's a really hard thing to kind of test for when you're recruiting people. But if that forms part of your hiring strategy, then you shouldn't need to prune people, just dead repos.
Chandru, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, I was going to solicit anyone's anonymized anecdotes about when they did have to prune or weed. I'm just, obviously maybe it's not shareable, but I'm just curious about people who've had that situation and had to go ahead with it.
Yeah, funnily enough, I had I had to go through that probably a couple of years ago. But yeah, I agree with most of the comments that have been shared before. So it's usually not a binary choice. You either have a rose bush or a weed. So you have a lot of people that are intermediate, who used to be a rose bush and now they're going through a tough time or whatever, just not in the right place, not motivated enough. So it's up to a leader to bring that on. But yeah, there are definitely cases, where things cannot be controlled, cannot be changed. I think in one of the instances where I had to get rid of somebody, so it was a very, very toxic place to be in, and really where the team was really struggling, and there was no self-awareness. There was a really big blame culture in there, and I had to kind of step in and say, this cannot continue, and they're gonna have a massive impact, and which means that this is really, this person has to go. So I had to take a decision, can't drag on for a while. So yeah, but that's a very extreme situation rather than a normal thing for me.
I think it somewhat depends what type of organization we're talking about. I mean, clearly for a growing startup or software business, I completely agree with what people have said here. You want to be very careful in your selection process. But if you're a captive technology team in, let's say, a global financial services firm, which I've done a few times, there's business cycles that happen. And there's this tendency for people in technology to think they're not part of the business, but fundamentally we are. And what's going on across the business, you have to do your part in. So I've been through a number of waves of the financial services business cycles from back to year 2000, where as a leader of technology, you have to do your part, right? There's a 10% cull across the organization. You have to do your pruning, your culling, whatever you want to call it. It's a brutal thing to do, but it's sometimes absolutely necessary.
Any more thoughts on that before I move on to our next question?
I think that there are businesses that choose not to invest in people. Fair enough. That's a choice. It's a business strategy. I think that the general assumption, though, is going to be, if you're talking about scaling up, you're talking about a business that's heavily dependent on its people. So you're going to be assuming it's a business that made the choice to invest in the people.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. So as regards, we've got lots of questions, but I'll go for this one. Does anybody have any experience or any advice for how you would run a successful, successful multi-time zone scrums? So global scrums. Anyone got experience of that, or any advice how you would do that best?
Yeah, I can take that. At the moment, we're working with huge teams in India, in the US, Ukraine, a couple of other locations. We're very distributed. We're opening new offices in Vietnam as well. So we basically what we've done is instead of having two separate, because we're still quite a small team, we have a few people in many locations. But we basically do a stand up at lunchtime, the UK time, which is sort of in the middle. That kind of works for us. We are trying to keep to a sort of DevOps team, so we're trying to always work together, but we are actually working on quite disparate things. So it's more of a catch up really than a proper single team stand up. But I think it makes people feel less isolated. So it's probably not the Agile Manifesto version of it, but it's certainly it's a nice way to think.
Something from my experience is grouping people from similar locations into the same team. So that team can be synchronized, and then only the leader of the team needs to represent it in other meetings in other time zones, so they can coordinate. Having a single team spread across multiple time zones, yes, I guess it can work. But there are many challenges around synchronization, and even if we try to be async as much as possible, sometimes coordination is needed, and finding the right slot in people's calendars to do that is something that can be simplified.
Yeah, so sorry to add to that just quickly. The flip side of that is in the startup, when I was in startup, we did like you're saying. So we had QA mostly predominantly in South Africa, and we had a mobile apps team in Ukraine, and so those were kept separate. Just at the moment, I've sort of got a more corporate job where we do span time zones, but we are one team. So both of them sort of work, but that's enough for me.
When we build teams, we typically have them integrated teams in the beginning to transfer domain knowledge. So, and there you have to suffer the time zone difference, and the team have to figure that out. And that is integrating teams over different locations. So if you've got 2 or more locations, when you build a team, you then take 3 people from the existing team, and then you augment with 3 or 4 from the new location, and then they can get the domain knowledge very quickly transferred. But we see mostly that the teams, we then split them out into, they call isolated, I don't like the word, but it's called isolated teams. So that then if they're like 6 teams and they were first kind of integrated, then there would be 3 teams in London and 3 teams, let's say, in Malaysia or somewhere else, to get the more productivity. But then you can move that backwards and forwards when you need a new project. You might want to have the teams integrated for a period, and then you split out teams afterwards. I think there are advantages and disadvantages. So if your setup is geographically spread out there from the onset, there's advantages and disadvantages of having them working together over different time zones, or having them working in each their responsibility areas, and that you have to choose the right for the horses for courses.
What I also found to work quite well is defining clear core hours when all of the teams are available. An overlap of 2 to 3 hours at least every day when from all geographies, people are able to exchange ideas, ask their questions, and follow up on others. Outside that time, yes, of course, stick to your local schedule, but having the fixed overlap when everyone is expected to be online and available for their peers is quite important in my experience.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I'm loving all the thoughts you guys are coming out with. It's great. I love learning things. So when you're looking to upscale, where can you safely cut corners on skills and or headcount? Is there a time when you can safely do that when you're looking to scale up?
I guess when you see potential in people, even if they don't have the skills, but they have the willingness to learn and develop, you start investing in them, even with the skills that are missing right now, and straight away you are working towards forming those skills up to the level that you need and the expertise that's necessary. But it requires a further investment. It's probably a compromise in the recruiting process that not every company can commit to.
Yeah, also think about the scope and complexity of the role, and also how quickly if somebody is performing or well or not. So if the feedback loop is shorter, then you could take a risk with unknown quantity. Certainly not with like some team leader or somebody you want to probably do due diligence. But if you are hiring somebody with like certain skills and you're gonna lose them for some reason, you quickly know whether they're gonna be good or not, I think it's fine to cut corners and say, I'm gonna take decisions. So it's really around, okay, there's this how quickly you can reverse this decision. That's a big factor in making those decisions, in my opinion.
Can I turn the question around slightly? I think
absolutely.
Hello, Abby. So rather than cutting corners, for people that have done the scaling, what are some of the roles or maybe even processes that you didn't think you'd need to get in place, the kind of ancillary ones, rather than just piling on more engineers, more QA? What are the ones that you didn't necessarily think about at the start, but then realized, actually, we need some of those to make this work?
IT support is one that we neglected for some time until it became apparent that there is way too much work around the initial onboarding and sorting out equipment and setup for people that started occupying too much of the time of the engineering managers, of the DevOps team. It wasn't centralized, it was ad hoc. Getting IT support in place is one of the important parts during a scale up.
Nice.
I think to add on to that, I think when you're a small team, everyone just knows everything by osmosis, by those frequent interpersonal connections. And then when you get to a certain size, suddenly no one knows anything and barely knows who to ask. So capturing that knowledge, unfortunately, in documentation, in a wiki, whatever it might be, it's a chore. Nobody wants to do it, but once it's there, you have that kind of full transparency. Everyone knows where to go, and it's a real boost.
So you're saying invest in someone whose job it is to do that?
We didn't. So our kind of engineering org is about 100 people now, and we kind of lent on people to spend the time. And I think broadly people thought it was worth it. And you can kind of see, I know this is a terrible metric, but I regularly git pull our wiki and do a word count, right? And I can see there's this kind of steady trajectory. And I know we can have a long conversation about the benefits of that metric, but it's active, and I'm not bullying anyone to do it anymore. So I think people are invested in it and see the value.
Surely your engineers are gaming that and just putting loads of hidden words in and churning them.
That's the worry. That's the worry. Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
So we've had another question come up in the chat. Any thoughts on how to successfully build a hiring funnel to scale a team when you're a small company with no dedicated recruitment agencies or budget to hire via recruitment agencies?
Well, you're not scaling then.
Are you not?
If you don't have the
I
budget
don't know.
for that, you're not scaling. I don't know what you're doing at that point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you can always ask your existing employees if they've worked with someone, and I don't know how successful that is. I've often had people I'd want to work with again in the past, but they've usually got jobs. But you never quite know. You know, if you can get someone to recommend someone else, I'm sure that would be successful. I don't know how often that's actually happened. Like I said, most people are employed, but that would be my first call there.
My first question would be, why? How has someone not got the budget to hire via recruitment agencies? Because they really don't cost that much compared to the cost of hiring a person and paying their salary for the next year. I can give many reasons why you shouldn't use recruitment agents and why they're horrible and scummy people. I can also give reasons why they're lovely and wonderful. But
cover your ears, Abby.
I mean, so I'm not saying that everyone must always use recruitment agents, but to say that you don't have the budget for it, I'd be like, well, how can you afford to hire people then?
Let's say you're hiring 5 people and that might cost you 40K. If the difference between your company surviving and doubling in size is 40K, then I agree with Adam, you're not scaling if that 40K is going to be the difference between, you know, doubling in engineering capacity or not. It's not an area you want to shortcut either, because the amount of time senior engineers will spend doing 2nd and 3rd interviews and coding tests and marking coding tests is going to burn through way more than 40K's worth of lost opportunity in a couple of months.
And just on behalf of RecWorks, not all tech recruitment companies are bad. Some of us are nice.
I meant to be equal-handed there and say, I mean, I can give examples of horror and greatness equally.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I was trying to say, I'm not trying to push someone either way.
No, that's fine. I'm just messing with you. It's good. It's good. I like it. I like the conversation. It's great. Okay. What else have we got to ask? So, does anybody have any experience of using a platform team? What are your thoughts on the viability or scope of that kind of approach?
I think if you mean build a platform team, if you look at something like team topologies, and I don't think it's we need a platform team. I think it's what are you trying to build? Who are you trying to build it for? And what do you want people to do most effectively? So team topologies talks really well about, you know, having teams aligned to delivering product value, but not having a massive cognitive load. You can't get them to solve every single thing in the stack, or they'll never get anything out the door. So you might then say, okay, we need to build a platform team, and that platform team is there to enable teams to deliver software effectively. And that's what we have. We have a team called Engineering Effectiveness, who are, you could say loosely, a DevOps team, but their role is also to make the job of building products easier for engineering teams. So to my mind, that's what a platform team is. You could do it more purely as they build an underlying platform and everybody, you know, deals with that through services or whatever, which is kind of the next, you know, another stage of that. But I think it's come at it, I would always come at it from what do you need people to do to make your engineers as efficient as possible in delivering value to customers.
Yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of that.
Makes sense.
Because what I've been looking at for sort of 2.5 years is moving into the cloud, and with that, there's obviously a lot of change in how teams are structured and how they work together. And there is a shift to DevOps, which is where it doesn't mean you don't have a platform team, because you still have the Google, for example, approach of SRE, which is more about defining sort of the service levels. So that could be considered a platform team. But as much as possible, you do want engineers to be responsible for the end-to-end lifetime of the products, of the change of a code bug fix or something, right to deployment. So at that point is the DevOps side. But yeah, I think having an SRE team or expert or someone also, you could call that a platform team as well, with the actual sort of setting up the cloud side of things. But it is a huge shift in culture, as well as you know, having different teams and moving into the cloud, having one team that does multiple things. It's also sort of being very often overlooked when it comes to team management and so on.
We have a team similar to what Ken was talking about. We call it Core. And it kind of came around because we realized that the application teams had a different thing they were trying to optimize for. They were trying to optimize to get things out the door for the product owner, and the things that they were building was like, it's good enough, we don't need to document that. So putting it into a core team, giving them different end users, really changed that focus. But we still find it quite hard, because it's almost sort of like non-functional development stuff. They're building stuff that doesn't get put in front of clients who give us money. So it's always a bit of a hard sell to go and show that increase in effectiveness and kind of justify their existence, really.
Yeah, it's a culture change. It's one of those things that are very hard to get right, coming from one to the other. But I think with time, it's all part of, well, once you have ownership of the whole life cycle, then you start thinking about
Well, we have a platform team, and similarly, we experienced that challenge, Chris, that you mentioned in terms of demonstrating value. They keep themselves in favor in the business by occasionally doing quite big wins in terms of cloud spend. So if you have someone really focused on your kind of back-end platform, we found something like, I don't know, 15K MRR of savings in sort of replatforming how we did some of our AKS stuff. Now, obviously, they shouldn't be targeted on revenue. Sorry, on spend. But it definitely gets them in the good books. It gives them a lot of runway to do the other things that we know as technical leaders are important.
It's interesting. We kind of saw that on our, if you Wardley map it, some of the sort of interest is like, yeah, they need to be showing those sort of wins that may not be necessarily aligned with what the engineering teams want, but it's kind of that, right, you need to do that as a, I don't know, let's call it a cost of business.
So my next question, it has kind of been touched on already, and I think, but I'd still be interested to hear if anyone's got any further thoughts on it, is how do you measure and maintain a positive mindset or culture whilst scaling?
Yeah, don't scale.
Talk to people. I was going to say, talk to people. Yeah, you know, if you're taking people on a journey and you want people to come on the journey with you, they've got to know where they're going. I think having scaling plans that, you know, are kind of hidden in secret and then you try and build it behind teams' back, I think is the wrong, some people do that, I think it's the wrong way to do it. I think you have to, you're trying to take people on a journey. So I think if you want to build a culture, talk to people and get them to help solve your problems. So we're doing a big scaling at the moment, and we'll shortly be running a whole bunch of scenarios with the engineering teams. You know, how could we, what might the problems be that we're going to see if we double the size of the engineering team? What is it that you care about? They care very much about quality. So what is it we need to ensure we do to ensure that we maintain the engineering culture that you've got? So I think engage them, get them involved, make them part of your scaling.
I think
Absolutely.
measuring this is very difficult.
Yeah, I was going to say the existing teams are quite important when you scale as well. So you don't want to hire new people and just put all of them in a new team as well. So you need the existing teams to help out with the building as well. So in terms of like referring or whatever, and then want to redistribute them into the new teams and, you know, get them to work together, you know, train them up and get them to be, you know, up to date and everything. So yeah, communication is the key here in getting the right results.
I think one aspect we always forget is that software is never finished, right? And sometimes if you're in the trenches, you're going to feel like it's a treadmill. It's never finished. There's always pressure to deliver the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And sometimes you just have to pause and celebrate your past successes and explicitly call people out by name, call out teams individually for their achievements, and spread that positive energy and sort of just remember how much you've done. And that's so important, just to remind people how amazing they are. And that keeps the positivity up, I think.
Maybe a related question. How do you maintain this positive culture while you bring in more people? So you say, you have existing teams. What happens when you bring in more senior people? How do you make sure that transition goes well? Maybe, some of the more junior people who are up and coming and had led those teams for some time have to maybe hand over some of that leadership responsibility. And how do you think about that?
I think to come back to what we're doing at the moment is somebody talked about it earlier, have career plans for your people. Rather than recruit senior people in over the top of people, can you develop people into those senior roles? And I think, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. If you can't, people should be, quite happy with that. Yeah, we've got a guy coming in that's bringing in skills we haven't got. Fantastic. But see them as bring them in to lead and to mentor and to develop people. Don't bring them in as superstars. I think as soon as you develop that kind of mentality, either with new people coming in or external people or internal people ready, then you've got a problem. So I would always say, can you develop somebody internally into the role? If you can do it, if you could but not quick enough, then bring someone in and give them the brief of mentoring that person into the role as well. Because if you're scaling, you're going to need them anyway. You're going to need senior people. So
any other thoughts on that one? Okay. So when you are bringing more people into your team, or some of the roles are changing, say, how do you manage the change in responsibilities and reporting, particularly when bringing in the new leads of a particular discipline? Is there a best practice for managing that change of responsibility and reporting? Did my question make sense? Excellent.
I think the reporting doesn't tend to change that much. There might be some lateral movement, but I think typically I haven't been through a big reorganization that would change around, who's reporting to who very much. I've reported to different people at the same level, and that hasn't really changed my day-to-day much, but I don't know about other people.
Chris, you look deep in thought. Go on.
I'm always deep in thought. Sometimes it emerges into action. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, because we are starting to go through this and kind of doubling from 2025, double that. So we are starting to move things around a little bit, and I think the main thing is just communication. I've learned to not sort of ambush people, to try and give them as much notice as possible that things are going to change. Things are changing soon. They're about to change. Oh, they're changing now. But I think for us, I keep the sort of line management structure independent of the teams that people are in. It's not always a correct solution. I know ones where we have the line managers in the same team, they find it a lot easier to work out what's going on. And it's a lot easier when we get to sort of appraisal season. They've got direct contact with these people, but it does tend to give a bit more stability, especially if you're dealing with more sort of feature-led teams and you're moving people around. Yeah, that helps. Yeah, not sure I've got anything more to add to that, so I'll shut up.
I have a kind of very very recent experience of my own where we have grown from a small team, like 5 people, to 10 people. So we're not necessarily scaling up that much, but there's still some people that were from the start. They were they know all the things about the platform that we've built and so on. And I've noticed that it works quite well if you kind of spread those people out, because they are your core knowledge. They essentially, you may do fantastic documentation, you can have a fantastic onboarding system, but the people that have built the kind of core team, the initial team, when you move them around between different tasks and get them involved in many small other teams work, that does work quite well. So it's a recent experience, and it has just come to fruition a couple of days ago. So I'm quite happy with that.
Oh, congratulations. Fab. Okay, so do people still prefer the Spotify squads model? Does that work for you? Do you use it? Has anybody used it and then decided against it?
I think the Spotify squad model is an interesting one, because I think it's kind of a mythical. I think it's been beautifully published in the media. I think it's almost a mythical model that everybody says, you know, I'm 10 people, hey, I'm going to be Spotify. And I think when you talk to people with inside Spotify, you read blogs by people in Spotify, they all say that wasn't the journey we took to get to the Spotify model. That's kind of an end game. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that makes you think about, how do my teams collaborate? How do they communicate? How do they work together? What are the key disciplines? What are the kind of processes that I need to make this business work? But I think starting a scaling model by saying, brilliant, we're going to be Spotify, you're going to be disappointed.
And I think we have to be clear, Spotify squads are literally Scrum. It's not something different, it's not something bigger or small, it's Scrum. So saying you want to do the squads is saying you want to do Scrum with all the pros and cons that brings with it. I think the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is it doesn't really, the whole tribes thing doesn't come in until you start saying the whole, we've already gone beyond 50, 100 people, and we want to maintain the way of working of Scrum. How do you do, I see tribes as basically the answer to how do you do Scrum with several hundred people? But again, to Ken's point, a lot of people don't have several hundred people to start with, and a lot of people don't have Scrum, so they shouldn't even be considering tribes. They've got other questions to answer first and other decisions to make and discover if it works for them. I think a lot of people see the benefits of tribes and don't read what the requirements were.
Yeah, great comment, Adam. I think the thing you really got knocked on the head there was, work out the problems you're trying to solve, and then work out the best way to solve that problem, rather than, yeah, Spotify is scaled Scrum with some other stuff slapped on it. If that's not the problem you're trying to solve, then just work out how to solve your problem.
I think software engineers often are quite scathing about cargo cult programming, right? Where you just copy an approach just because you've heard of it, not because you understand it or there's any need for it. And I think the same can apply in management, right? Cargo cult management is a thing. And yeah, it may be right for you, but it may well not be. You need to examine it on its merits.
Especially if the company you're copying doesn't do that thing anymore because they've moved on since.
And there are situations in which basically you're just applying something, and nobody asks the first question: what are we solving exactly?
I think if you go back to the original article that kind of spawned the Spotify model all those years ago, like one part of it was, you know, we want the teams to be as autonomous as possible. And that can often work very well, you know, context dependent, because good developers like raw materials. They like groomed, estimated, well-specified stories with like a confluence backing it so they can do their own research, and they like nice UX wires. So it makes sense to have people all marching together in a squad, so the kind of raw materials are available for developers. That's fine. But then the rest of that article on Spotify is like, oh, but then what we've done is we've made all these autonomous teams. So in order to counteract that and the fact that they become siloed because they're fully independent, we've created all these other weird and wonderful kind of quasi Lord of the Rings type structures. But I like the first part. The first part's always worked quite well for me, is to have multiple disciplines in the same squad, which does always lead to exactly the problem that they then try and solve, which is how does a UX person in a squad become better at UX if they're just sprinting all the time and they don't actually have anyone else in the UX discipline in the kind of squad with them. But I think the best thing to say about the Spotify model has already been said, which is just because someone else has done it and solved their problem doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
The other thing to remember, of course, is step one of the Spotify model, which is, or you could say that step two is be a successful, fast-growing startup with a large amount of money that's moving very, very fast and hiring a lot of people. But step one is be Swedish. And it's a slightly joking, tongue-in-cheek one, but it's true. You look at how much, if you go and look at the Swedish culture and the Swedish societal norms, and then you look at the tribes model, you're like, oh yeah, there's quite a lot here that depends upon your company being largely Swedish. You try and implement that in Texas or in Japan or somewhere, and there's no way that would work. No way in hell. It's just so fundamentally misaligned with what people's default behavior is.
I think be Swedish and get a really good graphic artist, and you've nailed it.
Excellent. Well, that is pretty well time for us today, guys. Thank you so much to everyone for coming and everyone who's participated. That's been really interesting for me, discussion-wise, just to learn a bit more from all of you. It's always amazing and always a privilege. As I said at the start, our next Aspiring Tech Co-founder event is on the 1st of March at 1 p.m. Put it in your diary. We'd love to see you there. But obviously, we will keep you posted about the next CTO events as well. Fantastic to have you all here. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Take care.